Sorry to speak again. I'm actually catching up for a friend of mine who could be here tonight. So, I just want to explain quickly what kind of law we're going to have in Quebec and why actually the province had made these particular choices in drafting Bill 9. Now, as I said before, the political process that actually led to the drafting of Bill 9 was really the product of a report that was produced in 2007 by a committee of experts who was mandated by the government to study the slap situation in Quebec and then propose some legislative avenue in order to counter the growing phenomenon of citizens being gagged by improper lawsuits. So that committee supported legislative action, and that committee also proposed 3 different legislative ways for the government to counter slap suits. The first option that was on the table was indeed like the one on the model of those that are in vigor in the US and that were considered in Canada. It would have been a formal law dedicated especially to the eradication of slap suits. Now, this kind of formal law requires 6 different things. Firstly, the recognition and the definition of a right to public participation. Second, immunity for people who speak publicly over issues of public interest. Thirdly, the establishment of an emergency mechanism aiming at quickening the judicial process in order to ensure an early dismissal of slap suits. Fourth, the imposition of a provision for costs for the defendant. 5, the inversion of the burden of the proof. And then 6, and finally, the condemnation of slappers to pay damage to the defendant. Now, as I said before, this kind of legislation is truly the dominant model in North America. Yet the Committee of Experts in Quebec did not recommend this precise solution to slap issues in the province. Why? Mainly for 2 specific reasons. First, the right to public participation is already recognized in the Quebec Charter of Rights and Freedom as a dimension of freedom of expression. The Quebec Charter of Right of Freedom applies both to public and private entities, so it has a larger application for slap suit cases. The Charter in Quebec also has a quasi-constitutional status in the province. It was thus judged both unnecessary and highly risky politically to modify the charter in order to add a new right for public participation. And second, and this is really important, slap suits were understood by the committee as the byproduct of the failure of the Code of Civil Procedure to avoid the abusive use of the court system to silence citizens. So in order to counter slap suits, what we need is to change the rule of civil litigation in order to make this more difficult and more risky. So the committee judges that there was indeed no need to go into substantive rights. So 2 options were on the table in order to accomplish this. Firstly, simply modify the Code of Civil Procedure in order to accomplish this goal. And secondly, do this modification, but in the framework of a larger law that would have a preamble. In that preamble, the legislator would specify its objective and modify the Code of Civil Procedure in the province, reaffirm the centrality of freedom of speech and public participation, and specifically say to the court system that the new articles that are gonna be inserted in the Code of Civil Procedure in the province has to be understood as a way to protect freedom of expression and freedom of public participation in the province. Now, this last option was considered both by MPs and by many civil society organizations as the fastest and the best option put on the table to fastly counter slap suits in the province. So Bill 9 was largely built on that principle. Now the big question, is Bill 9 a good anti-slap legislation? Well, I am actually deeply critical of some of its limitations, but I still believe it's a really, really good first step. Let me explain why briefly. First, First, Bill 9 put in place a mechanism by which SLAPP suit can be early dismissed. Second, Bill 9 proposed to put in place a mechanism that would shift the burden of the proofs at the advantage of the defendant. Then, the defendant can possibly obtain the provision for cost. And then, with Bill 9, it is possible to condemn individually the administrators of a company who instigated a SLAPP suit to pay damages to the defendant. I never ever seen something like this in the rest of Canada. And finally, of course, the possibility to condemn a slapper to pay damage to the defendant. Now, the big issues now, once the law is going to be adopted by Parliament, it's to see what interpretation the court system in Quebec will make of these new articles. If we're going to have a strong anti-SLAPP bill in Quebec, we're going to have to be, hopefully, to have progressive court judgment in the upcoming new months. So thank you very much.